Sorry, give me a second here. There we go. I hope everyone's having a good week. At the end of the call, if anybody has any questions or you need to ask something or want to follow up on something related or unrelated to tonight's topic, please stay on. Also, the chat box should be open, or you can open a chat box on your screen by going to the bottom of your screen and finding chat, and it'll open on the side. If you have any questions while we're going along and you don't want to interrupt, you can type anything there. If you want to ask something, again, for later, if you want to ask something unrelated, but just put it there so we remember to talk about it, you can put it there as well. If you have any questions for Eric specifically while he's talking, but again, don't want to interrupt him, please type it there and I'll make sure I get the questions to him, or at least I'll bring it up to him after he talks. Otherwise, you can also, there's also an option to raise your hand during the conversation, which just lets us know you want to ask a question. You can either do it physically or there's a button actually in Zoom that you can raise your hand so we know you have a question. Otherwise, Eric will give some time for questions and answers and everything else like that after we talk. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and let Eric speak. He is the reigning world champion in Ironman for people named Eric Oliver from Cincinnati, Ohio. I'll present to you Eric Oliver. And everybody, if you don't mind, mute your microphone so Eric can talk and not have any random feedback. So Eric, the floor is yours. Have at it.
Thanks. So we're talking injury prevention, and in it, there's a lot that can be covered in injury prevention. So I know there'll be questions. Feel free to chime in, raise your hand, type up, interrupt with any kind of questions at any time, because really what I'm going to get to is just some basics of injury prevention, and really from there it's going to be whatever you guys want out of this session, because we can go into all kinds of different rabbit paths when it comes to injury prevention. So I'll touch on some of the surface stuff, and then we can go from there. And so injuries at its basic form, especially when it comes to non-traumatic injuries, so when we're talking about endurance training, and provided you're not tripping on something and breaking your wrist, Rick. Running injuries, walking injuries usually happen when load essentially exceeds tolerance, and that's with any injury really when it comes to non-traumatic. So either you try to push or lift something really heavy and you can't tolerate, and something gives way, or it can be a series of movements. So it can be several hundred steps. It can be when you're running in all these little things and little dosages, then gets to a point where your tissue, where it exceeds your tissue's tolerance, and then it turns into some sort of ache or pain. And if that ache or pain is ignored, it can then turn into something that we'll then call an injury. So sometimes aches and pains aren't necessarily injuries; they're just warning signs that something is amiss and that you need to start paying attention to it. So either you need to pay attention to it by getting it looked at, or you just need to give yourself a little bit more recovery time and more rest. And so with running, when it comes to running, our formula for trying to prevent injuries in runners is, one, we want to make sure that you're training properly. So we're controlling that load, which is your daily volume, your weekly volume, your monthly volume. And that is controlled by Rick and Laura and their schedules. And so we know that over the years, they have created a program that is a responsible program for runners and walkers to do for the marathon and half marathon distance. So if you're paying attention to that and you're not overdoing it or underdoing it, then we know that you're going to load your tissue, hopefully as safely as possible. But even when you follow a training program, there are still other ways in which you can, your tissue can get excessively stressed. And that would be if you're not moving correctly. So you don't have the proper mobility in certain joints. You don't have the proper amount of core stability. And then definitely if you don't have the proper amount of strength in your hips, or other aspects of your lower extremities that propel you down the road or help you absorb. And so with all of that said, that's why with the Team Builder program, we've put in the mobility and recovery day, stretching. That's why we put in these basic muscle activation days where you're just learning how to turn on your glute muscles. Breathing is very undervalued as far as doing it as a skill. So many of us, and I'd say out of all the runners we assess, probably 75% of runners or athletes in general don't know how to breathe properly. And that's part of our screening process when we're looking at runners is, are they breathing with their diaphragm? Which is why last week we focused on the diaphragm, learn how to breathe properly, because when you learn how to breathe properly, you'll stabilize the pelvis, you'll stabilize the spine, and then obviously you'll improve your ability to draw in oxygen. And so with all of these basic fundamentals, you can build, you're building a framework from which you can develop strength and efficient movement from. And when you're moving efficiently and you're absorbing forces properly and you're following the training program properly, the idea is overall you'll prevent any kind of stress, any kind of load that exceeds your ability to tolerate your tissue's ability to tolerate stress, so you don't break down. So that's just it in a nutshell as far as our thought process of and our philosophy behind preventing injuries. From here, we can go into more specifics as if anybody has any questions. I'm looking at the chat to see if there's anything.
Come on,
I think
guys.
the interesting thing about this whole COVID thing is I think that we all went from, nice mileage, consistency, maybe some cross training, into, I don't know, I'll speak for myself, nothing for a bit of time there when we all got, well, come on, kids came home from college and then there was figuring all that crap out, and it was just like, what, there's no races, what do I do? And then getting back into it. Now we're doing heat training. And I think, from what I've seen and heard, things crop up that normally don't happen, right? When you're just constantly in a cycle of training that you do every year, you do certain things in the fall and certain things in the spring, and you were used to that, right? Now we're just kind of, I don't want to say flailing in the wind, but we're trying to, we're just trying to all get things right. And it's interesting because things that hurt now that have never hurt before in my entire training career, because I think of that lull and then you getting back into it, and just the inconsistency of doing stuff, I think is hard, right? So
yeah, and if also during this COVID time you changed your habits, so maybe you're sitting more, or you're just not moving around as much because we were self-isolated in our homes, so you're not going to have the same kind of mobility maybe as you did pre-COVID. You're not going to have, you're going to lose, you've lost strength. And if you weren't doing any kind of strength training, it does not take long for our muscles to lose strength and the ability to produce force. And so when you combine those things, if now your hip flexors are tighter because you're sitting, if your glute muscles are tighter because you're sitting, and then you're also just not activating your muscles properly, when you start to ramp activity up again, it doesn't matter who you are. You could be a pro athlete. You can be just someone who's recreation running. If you're not doing the prep work before a training block starts, you're going to feel some aches and pains. And the stuff that you guys are going through in Team Builder, the stuff that we built out in Team Builder, some of those things we, year in, year out, when we start a new block of training with some of our athletes, so even some of our racing team athletes, they will start with some of these fundamentals all over again, just to get them to learn how to activate those muscles again, or work out some tightness and kinks that maybe they developed throughout the previous training block. And so the idea as we go through this, you'll notice that these programs, as long as you're doing them in the dosages in the beginning, you'll start to improve your mobility, you'll start to improve your muscle activation, your muscle conditioning, and then actually even the force production of your muscles And then as we progress from week to week, you'll start to notice more exercises getting more difficult and more challenging. And because we have to ramp you up, just like you have to ramp up mileage when running, so that on race day, the stress of 13.1 or 26.2 doesn't break you down. It's the same with the strength training. And the more that we can build strength, build mobility into you, the more that you go throughout the season, you're going to resist stress. And that's why strength training, if you open up any kind of magazine, runner's magazine or blog, there's always going to be a topic about strength training. And it's been so undervalued in runners that now people are coming around, and it does show that it can help you resist the stress and strain of running.
Guys,
So hopefully everybody's doing trying out the programs, the exercises.
Yeah, I mean, so just so you guys understand, one of the, and Eric can expound even a little bit if he wants to on this, but just so you understand the relationship between, so this season, something, again, we've wanted to do for a long time, and we really have now an opportunity to do, is this kind of integrating a strength program into the training program. And it gives us a lot more flexibility, literally and figuratively. And the program is built around a slow build, sort of like what Eric is saying, these like small doses at the beginning. And then, it builds. And in past seasons, you'll note that taking it easy at the beginning, and we really try to stress this, taking it easy at the beginning, it almost builds this tolerance. And so, that coupled with the strength program now that we're offering through Team Builder, it really provides a much more broad and better foundation to build your training. So, one, I highly recommend at least, checking out the strength options. And number two, as long as you're sort of following the slower build, it's one of the things, a lot of people say, well, oh, gee, I run, and I'm not picking on you, Heather, by any means, but it's true. I mean, most of us run year round, and we go from like season to season to season to season. And we almost get to the point where we say, it's okay. Like, I don't need a break. I'm fit. I'm used to it. This is no big deal. Sure, I ran a marathon last week, but that doesn't mean I can't run again this weekend, and to some degree, some of those things are true, but it's also very smart to listen to your body and to also, sort of listen to some of the concepts here, which will tell you that you do need to give your body a little bit of a break. And then as you ramp up, training season, one, is long, and two, it's hard on the body. So you need to do it slowly and smartly. If that's a word. I think that's a word. And so, I'll let Eric talk a little bit more about, that concept, but, the program is truly built around preventing you from being injured and preventing you essentially from overdoing it, which is what can cause injury.
Yeah. So like I said earlier in the opening, we want to control as much of that load as possible. We want to make our tissue as resilient to stress as possible. And part of it does come with strength training. We've been harping on that for the last 5 minutes or so. But the other part of it is mobility. We want to make sure that you have the proper joint range of motion that's required for you to run at your pace and faster if you want to get faster. Another thing is we want to make sure you have proper flexibility. So mobility and flexibility are different. Flexibility defines the length of muscle tissue. And so if you either have shortened tissue or you have lengthened tissue. Mobility talks about just overall range of motion. Now, range of motion can be stifled by inflexibility. So if you have a shortened muscle, you're not going to have the same joint range of motion as a lengthened muscle. But we have seen people where they have lengthened muscle, but they have poor mobility. And that could be because the joint itself is not moving properly. Also, the layers of tissue can be scarred down and prevent and aren't gliding properly. So if they're not gliding properly, you won't get the same kind of mobility. And so if you're lacking mobility from either one of those reasons, you're lacking strength or ability to activate muscles properly. And then thirdly, you're not coordinating your movements as efficiently as you should. And that's a trifecta for developing an injury when you start adding the load of progressive mileage as the season wears on, which is why we in the program we're building in not only strength and learning how to activate your muscles, but also the mobility with the active release days on Sundays using the foam roller and lacrosse ball, and then those stretches. And with stretching, if you are shortened with those muscles, you want to make sure that you're stretching for a minute to 2 minutes so that you can develop what we call semi-permanent lengthening. So if you're not stretching, if you have a shortened muscle and you're not stretching for at least 60 seconds, you're not going to lengthen that tissue. And so we put it on Sundays, but technically you should be stretching, 5 to 6 days a week. Because if you have a shortened muscle, when you stretch 5 to 6 days a week for about a minute to 2 minutes, you'll start to see that adaptation, as in a lengthened muscle, probably 4 weeks from the day you start stretching. So it takes some time to develop that. And where people are typically inflexible, where runners are typically inflexible, it's their hip flexors. So that's obviously on the Team Builder program. Their calf, so their soleus and their gastroc muscles, which are those are the two main calf muscles that everyone knows about, and they're stretched in two different ways: the quads, the hamstrings, and then the glute muscles. And so those are the primary stretchers that we've listed in Team Builder. And we've added a couple other ones just because they're muscles that we've seen correlated with injuries in our experience. And so everything in there it has been in Team Builder, has been developed from our years of experience in working with runners. It's not just exercises that we just picked out of Runner's World to throw on there. It's stuff that we screen out specifically because we see how it contributes to injury. I will say about strength, because we talked a lot about strength. Just because you're strong doesn't mean you're on an exercise, doesn't mean you're going to use that strength in running. And so a lot of times we have to teach runners, whether they're strong or weak, to use that muscle properly at the right moment in the running cycle or walking cycle so that they can actually propel and absorb force with that muscle. So I've tested runners who have really strong glute muscles, but then you put them on a treadmill or you have them do a single leg squat and they can't, they're showing all kinds of asymmetries in their movement. So, and it works the other way around. Someone can be really good in coordinating, but then they're just weak on the table. And I can't tell you how many good runners we've seen who have been in that manner. They can run fast, but then you put them on the table and they can't hold a muscle's contraction very, very well. And those are the runners that will get injured maybe late in the season or develop little aches and pains that force them to take a week or a few days off. And we know if you're a runner who's trying to train for performance, when you miss training, you're not getting faster. So the secret to performance and getting faster is staying healthy. If you can stay healthy, you can train consistently. If you can train consistently, you can get better.
The other piece of this for a lot of people, and I saw some conversations about this, obviously, in our Facebook group, and I think it goes without saying, but I think it needs to be said in this scenario, because also related to this is the heat, and a lot of us are struggling right now. I mean, I'll speak from personal experience. I mean, this weather to me is awful. I mean, absolutely awful. And every time I go out and run, I just feel like somebody's beating the living daylights out of me. And, I can run about 2 or 3 miles before I have to stop and walk and, kind of catch my breath and, sweep the pool of sweat off of my face and then, keep going. But very similarly, it's an adaptation. I mean, I can speak for myself again when I say, even in the last couple of days, and I'll say specifically today, when I went running, I didn't feel as bad. I mean, it was pretty gross out tonight, and I didn't feel as bad today as I have felt in the past couple of weeks. And I think that's mostly because of it's an adaptation. I'm starting to get used to the heat. I'm starting to get used to, I don't want to say the discomfort, but a little bit of that discomfort, but I'm also learning to accept it, right, when I'm outgoing. And it's very similar, when it comes to muscle activation. It's very similar when it comes to using your body when you're out on the road. So everything that Eric's saying, all of these things require, say, sort of repetition and attention, and you cannot always say, gee, it just feels awful, like what do I do now, because these are things, it's a process, and it's also a building mechanism. So it takes time, but it also takes effort.
I'll chime in also with heat. If you're not managing your effort properly, and so you're trying to run the same pace running out in the heat that you do in the fall when it's the 60s out, you're going to, your heart rate will start to spike. You'll start to get heavy in your steps. You'll get fatigued, and when you're fatigued, you're just not as coordinated. And if that's the case, maybe your cadence starts to slow, and you start pounding the pavement. You start getting heavier and heavier with your steps. If you're doing hill repeats, maybe the effort isn't quite there. You're just not able to generate the kind of muscle contraction that you should be. And then now all of a sudden you're making yourself more susceptible to the internal and external stresses that will break down tissue. And so you've got to manage your pace in the heat. And if it's slower or much slower than if it was ideal conditions, that's okay. You're still working your aerobic system or anaerobic system, whatever you're trying to get at. But you're not putting yourself in a situation where maybe you're less coordinated, and therefore putting more stress on your body, which then maybe not today, it's not going to bother you. Maybe you'll just get a little twinge, and it's something that'll go away by the morning, but we're only 2 weeks in. So if you find yourself 10 weeks in and you've been doing this, that little nagging stress builds and builds, and that compound effect will lead to breakdown as well. And so that's where nutrition and hydration is important too. In these conditions, you just need to make sure you are fueling yourself properly, and then you're definitely hydrating. And in the heat like this, hydration is important for managing your body temperature. Even just splashing water in yourself, but definitely get water in you before, during, and after, so you can manage your body temperature, so you're not cooking yourself so much.
And on that note, also be very aware of something that I'm aware of it, but I don't like doing so. Carrying your own water. Good news, bad news is you've probably already figured this out, but as you go out, if you're used to drinking fountains along your route that you're finding, I can grab a quick sip of water every mile, 2 miles, whatever it is. I mean, we all know where they are, at least around Hyde Park, Mount Lookout, Oakley, that kind of thing. They're all turned off. So, in the peak heat, which we're certainly encountering right now, there's no water out there. So make sure, if you can carry your own water, be smart, take it easy. Again, to Eric's point, slow down. You don't have to go. That's one of the reasons why we focus really heavily right now on effort when it comes to training versus pace, because, people just stare at their watch. Oh, I'm not going the same pace. No, you shouldn't be. So think effort. And if you can carry your own water or hydration option, whatever it might be that you use, definitely do so. Because if it's, 80 degrees plus and it's humid outside and you're out for, 4+ miles, you're going to need water. I personally struggle to carry my own water. I do it every now and then. But if you can do it, definitely do it. It makes a big difference.
So does anybody have any questions about anything maybe specific in Team Builder with the exercises, or any kind of strength training, injury prevention thought? Wow, we built a great program, Rick. No one.
It's perfect. Everybody's fine.
All you have to do is follow it. I mean, that's
follow it. I like that one Facebook post when he's like, "What do we do?" He's like, "Follow the calendar. Follow the Team Builder."
Which one do we follow?
It's like, yeah, we've been doing since the boys came home from college. We've been doing planks, like low planks and high planks, 1 minute each since they've been home. So it's funny starting to see them progress. It's kind of funny because they started out with their butt like completely like a V shape, and I'm like, no, it has to be flat.
Yeah.
they're still a little bit up, but it's now getting down there. It's just incredible to watch the progression of that whole thing.
And our program will progress too. For some of you, maybe these exercises are easy, but they're good review because it just gets you activating the correct muscles in the right manner, right sequence, and in a stable position. And so the program will build, and what Rick and I have put into this season is a culmination of my dozen or so years working with runners. Rick's, I don't know, here's what, 60 right now, so maybe 40 years. 40 years of
I
running.
was going to go the other direction. I was going to go the other direction and say my 27 days of doing what I do. No, I'm kidding.
And so,
yeah, back when the covered wagon used to pull up to the water stops and drop off the water.
Yeah. And so, between the two of us, we think we've put together a good program that will not only help you resist injury, resist stress, but make you better as a runner and walker.
Maybe during one of these, Rick, we need Eric just to take us through a series, and we all just do it on Zoom together, and that would be fun.
It's funny that you bring that up. So there will hopefully be a day where we'll do some demos of some exercises and some different things. As you just kind of pointed out, there's some challenges to doing that. The funny thing is, there's also challenges to doing that in person. Like, as crazy as that sounds. And one of the reasons why we wanted to do these Zoom calls and have like Eric talk and some other upcoming things is because it's, interestingly enough, it's actually easier to get everybody together this way than it is like at a specific location at a specific time where, especially like after a run or something, everybody's coming back at different times. So interestingly enough, we have a lot of different things we're going to do this season, and there'll be some opportunities to try some different things like exercises.
Yeah, hopefully once we get together, maybe this is something that can carry over to the live world.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the intent is that this is kind of an introduction to a future where we'll kind of meld these two things together and have kind of the best of both worlds and be able to have these conversations that then also sort of put it into real practice and do it. But truly take advantage of the team builder. It is a unique, I think, really cool piece of software and a very convenient and simple way to get, not only the training program, but now the strength and mobility program. And it makes a big difference, and it really is something cool. So I would highly recommend at least trying it out.
Yeah, in the videos, obviously, there's no discussion about how to do the exercise correctly. We were really just trying to demonstrate the exercise as best we could, and move on to the next exercises. And it allowed us to create a lot of volume of exercises. But even though we're demonstrating them properly, it's still difficult to understand, all right, what do you actually need to be doing, which is why we're trying to really slowly progress people through these first 2 or 3 weeks, and putting some extra instruction on how to position your spine and how to engage the core in a live scenario. That's where it's best, where you can be coached on how to do the technique. And so if you guys want to, before we had classes that you could try and but now obviously we're not able to hold a large strength class in our gym. But if you should ever want to consult with a therapist or one of the trainers, we do have those options too.
And is everybody aware, like, I know, I'm not trying to pick on somebody, but I know Sergio had some questions, but if you guys are in Team Builder, just to make you aware, if you haven't seen it, when you click on the specific either runs or exercises or, even sets of mobility, et cetera, if they're, if appropriate, there will often be up in the corner, there will be like a link. And I demoed some of this on the little demo video I did. which is amazing and beautiful. And you should probably watch it repeatedly just so you can see my shining face. But there'll be links to sometimes documents that'll give a better explanation of things. There's a bunch of videos on how-tos basically. And, you know, even like this week with hill repeats, we filmed some sequences that essentially show good form in practice when doing hill repeats and running on hills and running uphill and downhill. So I highly recommend pay attention to that, because it's up in the corner on Team Builder in the specific exercises or the runs if there's something appropriate. So I would definitely click on that stuff, because there's a lot of info in there actually. So it's very cool. And if you have some questions or you're not sure, like something's not making sense, typically there'll be that link there and it can help you get through. And Sergio, yeah, so Eric, I don't know if you can see Sergio's question there. I'll address question number 1 in a second, Sergio, but I'll let Eric answer number 2.
Yeah, so some of the exercises will require a band, and obviously if something, for a lot of the leg exercises, you can incorporate a band for most of them actually. If the exercise is too easy, go ahead and put a band around your ankles, your thigh, to make it more difficult. And really, it's, as far as the resistance goes, start with a resistance that allows you to do 10 reps, but it's challenging. So right now we're just trying to do at minimum 10 reps just to drive home that movement and to get the muscle activated. You don't want, we're not going to get into the point where you're doing a heavy resistance band, so heavy that you can only do 5 or 6 reps. We'll get to that point shortly, but if it's too easy, then you've got to add some resistance to it. And that's where a lot of runners will actually err in their strength training, is they think, well, running's a body weight activity, so I'm just going to do my body weight and I'm just going to stay with body weight, or I'm just going to do a lot of reps, like 12 to 15 repetitions, because that's working endurance, and running is an endurance. Well, that's not the point of what we're trying to get to. We're trying to build strength. And right now we're just in these initial phases of developing stability and getting you to learn how to activate the proper muscles. But as we build strength, the only way to build strength is to overload the muscle in a measured way. And the only way to do that is to add resistance, whether it's a band, dumbbell, kettlebell, anything that puts more stress on the muscle. And so that's the long way of saying, yes, use the band, and use one that is difficult even into the 10th repetition. If you're doing 10 reps and you feel like you probably could have done 5 more, then the band isn't strong enough.
Did that answer the question, Sergio? You're on mute, Jose.
Yeah, thanks. That answers the question, because these bands that I have right here, they're too big.
Yeah, those are long. They'll look long.
So I need shorter ones, right?
Yeah, you'll need shorter ones.
Okay, where do I get them? Just like a Target?
Yeah, you can get them at Target, Amazon. We sell them at our office, so we have the appropriate length ones if you want to stop by and buy them.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
And they're not expensive, so it's a convenient thing, and you can get the right one. And also, I'll do the dumb layman's version too. They should almost kind of be hard to get on. Like if you can just slip them right on your leg, they're probably too loose, because it sometimes will require a little, like almost like wiggling into it a little bit if it's going to be strong enough and tight enough.
Yeah, so you should be able to do full range of motion, but it should be difficult. So if the band prevents you from doing the full range of motion in the exercise, then that's too difficult too. Even if you can do 10 reps, you're not getting the full effect of the exercise if you're doing it through a modified range.
And then also Sergio and everyone else actually. Leslie, am I broken? Oh, darn it. Do I sound awful?
Sound like a robot.
I'm gonna cut out and come back.
Do this. So Leslie can teach